Hi everyone, this is Ethan Dre with another Photoshop tutorial. In today's tutorial, we'll be reviewing the Lasso Tool, which is a tool used to make selections. And there are three different types of lasso tools. We have the regular lasso tool, we have the polygonal lasso tool, and we have the magnetic lasso tool. All three tools are very useful depending on which project you're working on and what type of selections you're trying to make. Alright, so we're just going to go over to our toolbox and we're going to click on the icon that looks like a lasso, or you can always hit L on your keyboard, which is the keyboard shortcut, L for lasso. And if you click and hold or you right click, you'll notice that there are our three lasso tools. So for the first tool, the regular lasso tool, let's go ahead and select that. This lasso tool is good for people that have steady hands or if you're making kind of a vague selection, because all you're going to do is you're going to left click and you're just going to drag around the pixels that you want to select. So I'm just going to go ahead and select the sky here, and notice wherever I'm dragging my cursor, that's where our selection is going to take place. To complete your selection, you can go all the way around to the beginning of your selection, or you can just let up on that left click. You'll know that the selection is completed once you have the marching ants in your document. Now let's say you're really happy with your selection, but you notice something that you missed. You don't have to completely redo the selection. All you're going to do is go up here to the left side of your application, and you'll see these icons up here. We're going to click on the second one. That's going to add to our selection. If you look at your cursor, you'll notice that there's a little plus sign next to your lasso. That way we know that we're adding to our selection. A much easier and quicker way to add to your selection is by holding in Shift on your keyboard. And that's just going to add those pixels to your current selection. Once again, if you hold in Shift, and you're just going to click and drag around the pixels that you want selected. Now on the other hand, let's say you want to subtract from your selection. All you're going to do is go back up to these icons here, and you're going to click on this third icon, which is going to subtract from the selection. You'll notice that there's a little minus sign next to your lasso tool now. You can also hold in Option or Alt on your keyboard. And all you're going to do is click and drag and select the area that you want to subtract from your selection. That way those pixels will be subtracted from your selection and they will not be included in those marching ants. And the last icon we have is Intersect with Selection. This is going to pinpoint parts of your selection, and it's going to clear out the rest of your selection. So notice where I click and drag and selected those pixels, it kept our current selection, and then it just cleared out the rest of that selection. We also have Feather here, which is going to blend those pixels of your selection outward. That way you don't have such a hard edge. You can always increase your feather before you make your selection, or you can go to Refine Edge and feather your selection after it's been made. We also have anti-alias. What anti-alias does is it smooths the edges as opposed to having jagged, rough edges, and that way you have a clean selection. Next we have the Polygonal Lasso tool. So if we go over to our toolbar and we click and hold on the Lasso tool, we can go down to our Polygonal Lasso tool and select that. The Polygonal Lasso tool is great for polygonal selections. You start your selection by clicking to add a point. Anywhere you click after that is going to add a point for your selection. The more points you add, the smoother your selection is going to be. This is much easier to use than the regular lasso tool, but at the same time you're not going to get those rounded out selections unless you make a lot of clicks. Keep in mind, to add to this selection we can hold in Shift and we can just click and add our points. And to close out our selection with the Polygonal Lasso tool, we can always just follow back to the beginning, or we can hit Enter on the keyboard. Another thing to note with our selections and our lasso tools, or any selection tool for that matter, is if you need to move your selection, you have to have a selection tool selected in the toolbox. That way you can click inside of your selection and you can move it around your document. We can also deselect by going up to Select, Deselect, or hitting Command D on the keyboard. Last but not least, we have our Magnetic Lasso tool. Now with the Magnetic Lasso tool, we have a few more settings at the top. So let's touch base on how the Magnetic Lasso tool works first, and then we'll review these settings. So those of you that are familiar with the Magic Wand or the Quick Selection tool, the Magnetic Lasso tool is similar, in a sense that it detects edges by contrast. The Magnetic Lasso tool is also similar to the Polygonal Lasso tool in the sense that you can click to add points for your selection. We're just going to start down here with a point of high contrast between the dock and the water, and I'm going to make my first click. I'm going to follow this path of contrast between the light tones and the dark tones, and you'll notice that the magnetic lasso tool is detecting those edges. Now keep in mind, the less contrast that you have, the less likely that the magnetic lasso tool is going to be accurate. Also keep in mind that you can click to add your points similar to the Polygonal Lasso tool. Now a lot of people like the magnetic lasso tool because it seems very easy to use, but at the same time it's very touchy. Notice if it doesn't have complete contrast, then it's not going to make the correct selection. So let's go over these settings at the top for our magnetic lasso tool. First we have width. Width, as you can see, sets the distance from edge to consider for the path. So the further my width is, or the higher this number is, the further I can stray away from the edge I'm trying to lasso. We also have contrast. Now as you can see, the contrast sets the contrast of the edge to consider for the path. The higher this percentage is, the more contrast you need. The last setting we have to consider is frequency. Now this sets the frequency at which the points are added to your path. The higher the number, the more points that are added to your selection. Now that we've gone over all of the lasso tools and their settings, let's talk about some examples to where we might use these tools to our advantage. Some basic examples include copying, cutting, pasting, and deleting. Other examples might deal with color correction, contrast, and using adjustment layers or adding layer masks with our selections. Keep these examples in mind as you're working on each of your projects. Alright everybody, that's the end of our tutorial. Today we went over our lasso tools. We have our regular lasso where we went over adding and subtracting to our selections. We went over our polygonal lasso where we click to add points for our selection. And we also went over the magnetic lasso, which makes selections by contrast detection. I hope you all enjoyed today's tutorial on lassos. This is Ethan Dre with another Photoshop tutorial. Please check back for more, and thank you for watching.